Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heart of the Matter. I am your host, Elizabeth Vargas, and we have what I think is a pretty amazing podcast today. We are going to speak to Jessica Landon. She's one of the founding members of the Sober Mom Squad. It's a group dedicated to helping mothers who are in recovery or maybe just curious about no longer including alcohol in their lives or examining their relationship with alcohol. But Jessica herself has an incredible story. She's been in recovery from alcohol for 8 years after a near-death experience led her to the hospital with a staph infection, multiple organ failure, and a blood alcohol level of 0.5, usually fatal. I mean, it's unbelievable. She started drinking when she was just 12 years old to cope with anxiety. That's something I can relate to. I can also relate to the fact that she kept her drinking a secret for many years. She was highly functioning. She was an actor and a comedian of great success out in Los Angeles. And she often drank, she says, while performing. By the age of 26, Jessica says she was drinking vodka around the clock. And she calls her life a living hell. She said, quote, "I had created my own prison. Nobody in my life knew how bad it was. I was afraid to get honest about the severity of my drinking, so I kept it a secret for a very long time." It's something I can sure relate to. She is absolutely amazing in her courage and in the fact that she's speaking out today to help so many, especially women, especially moms, re-examine their relationship with alcohol and get sober. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Jessica Landon to Heart of the Matter. Jessica Landon, welcome to Heart of the Matter. I am so excited to have you on this podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, I read something recently that somebody in recovery wrote, and she said, "Nothing is more bewildering to me than harming myself against my own will." And that really resonated with me. Because I remember thinking, I didn't want to do this to myself. I'm in recovery now for many years from alcohol addiction. You're in recovery for many years as well, also from alcohol addiction. And when I read your story, that quote, came back to me because it is a story of harming yourself against your own will.
Oh my God.
Utter bafflement at doing so.
Exactly. And I think that is the irony about addiction is that we're actually in survival mode, getting to that next drink. Oh my God, my heart's going to explode if I don't get that next drink. So we're trying to survive while simultaneously killing ourselves. It is the most bizarre state of mind.
How long did you drink? And was it just alcohol for you?
That was the answer. It was, I didn't need anything else. That was everything. I mean, that was finally, I found what would help me survive in the world. I started really young because, I had I had some trauma when I was really young, sexual abuse. And I think it formed my perception of myself, but also it made me feel really unsafe in the world. And I didn't know how people could just live without, just be in the world without, and raw and just exist without something to curb that. It was just too callous to my nervous system. I couldn't sit in my own skin. And so at a young age, I started drinking from my dad's liquor cabinet. I would secretly sneak it, because it just finally let me just live normal and could just exist.
You have said that you were sexually abused when you were 4 and 5 years old by a babysitter. You told nobody because you thought it was your fault.
Right.
Something I think probably a lot of children have done.
That's the internal dialogue is, oh my God, I brought this on. What did I do to, I'm flawed. I'm responsible for this. I caused it. This is what children, that's how they perceive this event. And it's so traumatizing that, and then you start to believe that that's your body is your value. That's what you have to offer the world. And that was my biggest lesson in recovery was, oh my God, I'm not my body. Right. I'm not my thoughts. I'm not my fear-based thinking. That's not what I have to offer the world. That's not me. I'm encased in flesh, but that's not who I am. It's like losing yourself to find yourself, losing the ego to find your authentic self. It's like I over-identified with my body because that was my experience. That's, what I felt like all that mattered. And so, early on after high school, I went to LA and kind of fell into the entertainment industry. But first it was, the magazines and the Playboy scene and Hef and just doing.
You were a model. Let's give people the background. You were a model and a comedian and an actress.
Right. But it kind of happened. So the modeling first, because of course that's what I thought, I could come and offer the world, and it was empty. And I was just in so much pain, looked okay on the outside, maybe even glamorous on the outside, but internally I was dying. And I could smell the emptiness in other people that were also in this scene. It's like I felt like, wow, this is a real Hollywood is there's a soul sickness here. Like there's an emptiness that we're all trying to fill in the same way. And so then I switched gears and I kind of fell into entertainment industry. And I mean, I drank. This is when around 23, 24 is when I got like vodka kind of brought me to my knees. I became sort of 24 when I got the shakes. And I know you've talked about this in here, but when it started turning into physical dependency, I couldn't take it. That rebound effect, I could not handle that. So I had to start getting the get well drink, and do that before auditions and sometimes get a little too, get well drink would overshoot the mark. So they say, get a little obliterated. But I was able to function. I mean, I was in a comedy troupe performing bi-monthly at the Comedy Store. And, I was drunk on Drake and Josh. I remember the makeup artist said, and I had a bottle of vodka, like in a water bottle in my purse, I always did. And she was like, wow, you had a late night. I can smell the booze. And I'm like, yeah, I was, out late last night. No, I'm just, drinking in the bathroom because I'm can't even, function without my liquor. But, so uncannily, I could do these. I could perform in the world and act like everything was fine. But I was dying and I was getting sicker and sicker because, of course, there's that bell curve of, you get high tolerance. And then all of a sudden that get well drink is making you just sleep all day. And I know you talked about that too, where you just would just go to sleep.
Right. No, it's what I was sleeping a lot at the end of my drinking. For
your body is just so saturated. It just can't.
And you really put your finger, you really nail it when you describe that drinking, that get well drink. At the end, when you're getting so sick from the alcohol, and the only thing that will make you feel better is more alcohol, you're in the death spiral at that point.
That's it. You are in hell because you can't live with it. You can't live without it. That was the point of really being terrified. I was so terrified when I knew 2 hours into sleeping, my heart would be pounding and I needed to reach for the drink because I'm shaking so bad. I need a straw. I mean, that's when it was like, oh my God, there's nowhere to turn now. Alcohol has betrayed me. And I can't get sober on my own. I will die and I can't tell anyone. And that went on for a while. And until
how long?
God, that terrifying space of like not, of knowing, there was no way out was probably lasted maybe a year towards the end, when I just started blacking out, I couldn't remember, I would just go shopping and not even remember what I bought and that lasted probably a year of knowing that I couldn't live with it or without it. And then finally I knew towards the end, I'm, vomiting blood. I'm getting so skinny, bruised everywhere. I knew I had to tell my parents and I knew they were the only ones that would help me, And so I packed some water bottles of vodka, went to my mom's house and they thought I was struggling with like mono or some illness because I had gotten so skinny and ill looking, but I was still sort of functioning. I wouldn't slur my words. But I was sleeping a lot. And so I told my mom and I detoxed for a couple of weeks. I mean, it took a long time to get off of the alcohol because it had been so many years. I was so saturated.
By the way, it's important to interject here for our listeners. You can die from alcohol withdrawal.
Yes.
Alcohol withdrawal, it kills you. That's what Amy Winehouse died from, is alcohol withdrawal. It is a serious thing and nobody should try and do this by themselves. When you talk about that waking up after only being asleep for 2 hours because your body was starting to
hit it,
desperately need more alcohol and having your heart racing and shaking, we're talking extreme physiological symptoms that can be deadly. Don't try and do this by yourself.
Exactly. And I knew that. I had read, like when you're struggling with someone, you read up on everything about it. I mean, I knew everything about alcoholism because I knew at a very young age, I was using it to medicate. I was using it in the wrong way. And I knew that at 11 years old, 12 years old. I knew that it was wrong to do. And I knew something was wrong with me, but I knew it was the only answer. It's the only way I could survive in the world. And, so that was the beginning of years of in and out of psych wards because my BAC would get so high. They think I was trying to drink myself to death.
Your BAC, your blood alcohol content.
Yes. In the end, it was a 0.533. And I was, I had
How did you survive that?
Oh my gosh. I know. I really do not know. It was unbelievable. But it was also where the magic happened. It was also the blessing getting that low because it's almost like my tolerance to pain was so high. I had to go there for the switch, for the shift to happen in my brain, for the pain associated with alcohol had to become greater than the pleasure associated with alcohol. And that took a lot of pain for me. And it was the blessing that it took me so long to be able to walk, to, because I was in ICU and just 2 months before that bottom, I had a brain hemorrhage from falling over a railing drunk. I had emergency brain surgery. They had to detox me from alcohol for a few days. Then I had emergency brain surgery, had, half of a shaved head, went back to LA. And I did it all over again. And you talk about some of the relapses in your book that just, they deeply resonate because that's exactly and when people would try to analyze, when I get back in treatment and someone's like, why you keep relapsing when you have the knowledge and you're going to die, why do you pick up? And for me, it was like, it's so deep-seated and instinctive that it's like trying to analyze, a wild animal taking a bite of the first weak buffalo. It's like, it's my survival skill. That's my only way I can cope, with the feelings. And it took a long time to realize like feelings can't kill me, but a drink probably will. Like that pain had to happen to get to that realization. And I wanted to live a little bit. That's all it took was 1% more. I wanted to live just 1% more than I wanted to drink in the end. And that's all it took. It's all it took was just wanting life a little bit more than a drink. Because I remember the doctor, they were working so hard to, all my organs were failing. I had a specialist they're working so hard to get me back to functioning my body. And he came in and he said, because, I had been in and out of, detox in hospitals. And he said, do you want to be sober? And I just remember thinking, do you think I would be in this position if I wanted to be sober? I want to function, but be drunk 24/7. I want to be able to manage my life, but still be drunk. That's what I want, but I can't, obviously. And I want to live. I want to live. So I had to just learn. And oh my God, there's just so many lessons when you finally crack open your psyche. You really just get into a space of acceptance and you become so teachable and open to all paths and programs and religions. And there's all these universal themes and you start connecting dots and you realize, oh my God, I'm not my body. I'm so much more. And that thing that I'm connected to now is not separate from anything or anyone else. And having that revelation is just, it's everything. It's the only reason I was able to stay sober. That spiritual, that awakening, that resonance, that deep, tapping into the source consciousness, the Christ consciousness, whatever you want, tapping into that and knowing that we all have that. And I think that's what aha moments are. I don't think it's something we just heard. I think it's almost like a reminder to our soul, something we already know is true with a capital T.
How long do you think you were in that death spiral, as we call it? Because I'm struck by your story that you not only survived, but that you were in that death spiral a long time.
A long time, yeah.
Longer than most, I think. Most people die. Or somehow, find it.
And women, it's a lot harder on their bodies. We don't, break it down as well as men. And so there's a lot of liver failure. And when women, it's sad that, alcoholism, excessive drinking in women has gone up since 2013. I think it's just the modern motherhood, the load of motherhood. And reading your book, I'm like, oh my God, what was on your shoulders and breastfeeding and showing up to work, doing all these things. I'm
being the breadwinner. I was the person who supported the family and it was a lot. And it's only when I looked back at that while writing the book that I thought, a little bit of the same thing, like, oh, okay, well, there really was a lot. I wasn't imagining it. I was really stressed out.
I was in shock at how much was on your shoulders. It is no wonder, and yeah, but motherhood in general, it's just so much. And, but you said, how long were you in your, gosh, a long time. I think, it definitely progressed. I was very functioning in the beginning. It was my medication. I used it for anxiety. In fact, it was so much like medication that one time I had a panic attack going over Coldwater Canyon. There's something about like the hills and feeling like I was going to fly off or feeling stuck up there. And I started having a panic attack and I could never go over that. If I ever had to go over that hill, I stopped on Coldwater in Ventura, there was a route. So I would stop and have to get alcohol and just touch it with my hand while driving over the hill. Just touching it.
Not even drinking it. Just
not drinking it. This was before I had, crossed over into 24-hour a day drinking. This was literally when I used it like medication. Okay, it's there if I need it. I think you talked about that with anxiety for plain, you better knowing you had it.
I would drink to make my panic attacks subside.
Yeah. And then there's a rebound and you're like, oh my gosh.
Well, I didn't find out about the rebound anxiety and the rebound panic until after I got sober. And I interviewed, somebody from the NIAA, and she was like, yeah, you don't understand. It's like a boomerang. It comes right back at you. But this time, with your anxiety and panic supercharged. And then of course you have to drink more because the panic is bigger and the anxiety is bigger.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. And trips. Oh, I just remember being so humiliated when I remember going to Hawaii and drinking on the plane because I was having so much anxiety. And then I got there and this is towards the end when I was really, really saturated. We went on a cruise with my family for my parents' anniversary and I was drinking 24/7. And my brother kept saying, where's all the alcohol going? But, nobody really knew it was me, but because we had brought a bunch of bottles of vodka. But anyway, I remember getting there before we got on the cruise. And the next morning I was having a full-blown perpetual panic attack. I had to get downstairs to a bar. Something had to be open. And the guy poured me, I said, a double shot of vodka, please. I was, the only one. Everyone's like having breakfast at the bar. And I was the only one at the bar. And he poured me and I couldn't pick it up because my hand was like this.
Shaking.
I couldn't pick it up. And he looked at me with these eyes that it tore my soul apart. I knew he knew. And he handed me a straw. And it was like, oh my gosh, I can't live like this, and that was towards the end. I think like a month after that cruise, I went to treatment. It was a wonderful experience, so much connection and nature, and I loved it. And I finally felt free, but of course I was still in denial a little bit. I thought, I just needed to get it out of my system and go back to white wine. I think vodka brought me to my knees, but I think I just need to go back to white wine.
Okay, I've heard that one before.
The insanity.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is you have to get to a place of really deciding you're done. And it doesn't matter how many rehab, doesn't matter how many stories, you hear, even though it is important to tell our stories. It is so important to tell our stories because it can really change somebody. You don't have to go through the pain, you can catch it. So many moms, like I'm part of this community, Sober Mom Squad, and I do lead some meetings there. And these moms it starts to get a grip and they cut it off. They
right.
You know what I mean? So it's
I've met a lot of people in recovery, and most of them women, because the men usually have stories like ours.
Right.
But I've met a lot of sober women, who, found sobriety and gave up drinking after, like a one bad night, and then we're like, oh my God, I can't do that anymore. I need to get sober. I'm going to go to rehab. I'm going to go to AA. I'm going to go do, whatever it is.
Isn't that fascinating? Get it. Isn't that fascinating? And we took it to the ground. And I think, bottom is subjective, obviously. Some people feel pain just by getting a DUI or losing, having a divorce or nothing, just having an emotional bottom. It's a subjective thing. We experience bottoms differently. And ours just happened. We just took it further and had a higher tolerance to pain or something. I don't know. Crazy.
Your last hurrah, so to speak, with alcohol was harrowing. There's just no other way to describe it. It was harrowing. As you just said, you had a blood alcohol level of 0.5, which is beyond fatal. It's unbelievable you survived that. Tell me what happened and why that one finally got you to turn that corner.
It was kind of the experiences leading up to that too. I had been on the streets, people kind of pulled away from me when they didn't want me to die on their clock. It's like friends were like, disappear. Family had cut me off. Finally, they were just like, there's nothing we can do. She's got to, hit bottom or die. They didn't know what to do anymore. And so I was in and out of, just strangers' places. And I had gotten lice from a girl in AA, her daughters. So I got lice. I was on the streets and I was stealing vodka from stores. I didn't have anything. While I was stealing vodka from stores, I went to Linwood County Jail. Let me just tell you, that was the most traumatic experience in and of itself. And then I got out, and that's when I met this ex-veteran who would sing with his guitar to make money outside of Ross. And he was helping me, and he got me vodka. And I don't think he really understood what was going on. I just sort of convinced him that I needed to drink 24/7. And I laid on this apartment. I don't even think it was his. It was just like this hoarder's apartment. I laid on the ground and drank for over a month. I didn't move and literally urinated and defecated on myself. For a month, I got down to 78 pounds when I went into ICU. I got a blood staph infection because the acid from my urine had burned holes in the bony parts of my skin where I was laying. So it infected my blood. And that's when I'm familiar with the feeling of dying, from alcoholism, but this felt like different. This felt like my organs were shutting down, and I was so, weak. I couldn't get up because I had atrophied. So I called an ex, and he could hear in my voice that it was an emergency. And he called 911, and they came, and man, it was the nick of time because the doctor said within 24 hours, I would have been dead because of the blood staph infection, and all my organs were failing, and I needed 2 blood transfusions. I was so anemic. So I was just bleeding out, blood coming out of my eyes, nose. I was just, because you just start hemorrhaging when you live on alcohol. You just hemorrhage. I mean, I hadn't eaten, and it's just crazy how I survived that battle, that war. But I came to about 16 days in. I remember
you were in the ICU for 16 days.
That's how long it took to get all my organs. They thought I had endocarditis, so I had a stent in my heart. To put antibiotics in my heart. I had all of these things going to help my organs start to function again. And I remember overhearing my dad on the phone to my granddad say, well, it looks like she's going to make it. And that's when reality seeped in. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Get me out of here. But fortunately, I couldn't walk. Thank God. I couldn't run to the vodka. I couldn't get off the bed. My thighs were too atrophied. I literally couldn't get off the side of the bed. So that was the blessing, was that I was so weak. I was desperate enough. Something cracked,
Mm-hmm. When you got out of the hospital, how did you stay sober? All the other times you'd been to rehab, all the other times you'd been to the hospital, and you walked right out the door and walked straight to the liquor store. This time you didn't.
I begged my parents to take me in because I didn't trust myself to go to treatment. I didn't trust that I would stay. I just didn't trust myself at all. And I wanted to be safe and with my parents. I was scared. I was scared of death, really stared at me in the face. And so I was very frightened and weak, and I needed to be nursed back to health still. So it took like 6 months of just little slow walks. I couldn't walk up the stairs. My ankles were still real swollen. So it took a while, and my parents did take me in. At first they were like, no, you have to go to no. And I begged them, and they let me stay with them for a year. They nursed me back to health. It was the most beautiful year because I only needed to focus on my healing and meetings and connection and finding the source and really discovering, exploring, and being just introspective and getting a sponsor and doing all those things. And we would hike, and it was a beautiful place to get sober. It was a year of just spiritual exploration and coming to again and coming back to life. So I have such wonderful memories from that year and I had looked like Peter Pan. I mean, it was an identity cry. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to come back to LA because I wasn't myself. I literally had no hair And I was like, I'm staying with you guys until my hair comes back a little bit. So, yeah. And then I moved back to LA in 2015. And it was just a continuation of self-exploration. And I wasn't, it wasn't just AA. I was started to seek other modalities and programs. And I did, a Course in Miracles, and that really cracked me open. And I just felt like I wanted more. I just was open to anything and everything. And I really felt like there were universal themes in everything. So nothing, I would take what I loved and leave the rest. And it was all connecting dots and really feeling like, this is it. Like I have found, I've lost my ego and found my authentic self. And the ego still, oh, trust me, the isms and the ego, and I had one sponsor say, ego is edging God out. And it really does feel like that. When I over-identify.
I like that.
I over-identify with what I'm doing and my achievements and my Instagram and I start to feel pulled that way. And I know, and the ego, Marianne Williamson always talks about the ego speaks loudest and it speaks first. And you have to just pause and, try to tap into your authentic self, the self with a capital S that we all, have.
So we know that, there are millions of people who suffer with substance use disorder, and therefore there are tens of millions of people who suffer through a loved one who is struggling with it. What advice would you give them? Because I'm struck by two things in your story. Yes, you were highly, highly functioning as an alcoholic. I'm wondering how you were able, how nobody knew, like, in other words, why didn't anybody notice or know what you were doing to yourself? So therefore the question, what should you look for if you're, for someone in your life? And then secondly, your parents didn't want to take care. They wanted you to go to treatment that last time. And you begged and pleaded with them to let you come home.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff out there, the tough love stuff. You got to let them hit bottom. You got to, I can't save this person. I can't save her. She is the only person who can save her. And that is true. You've just said that. It had to be you making that decision. But having been through an incredibly harrowing experience, what advice would you give to people who are on the outside looking in?
It is so emotionally injurious to those that have to live with someone that, and I think people close to that addict, it makes me, emotional thinking about, they do know something's going on, but a lot of times they're afraid to probe or ask or know. I think my parents knew for a while that it could be alcohol, but they were sort of in denial. Like, no, but she's always been able to control. No, I think there was.
And she's got a job, and no, she doesn't ever get into a car crash or pass out in the middle of a party. Right.
And I think what you mentioned, the tough love thing, here's my opinion. Everyone is different. That's for sure. We all have a different path to the same place. You know what I mean? It's very personal. So different things work for different people, different programs, different, maybe religion. It's different for everyone. But I do think universally for those, the loved ones, never stop trying, never lose hope. Because that's the one thing my parents did is they knew I was tenacious and could get to the other side. They never stopped trying. Once I got out of the hospital, once I was in treatment, they were there. They were ready to support me every single time. They never stopped. They never well, first you have to prove yourself, because that's really hard on it. You can't shame and blame, because that's just going to create another cycle of destruction, and I think they just went with their gut. They knew, I'm not going to give up. She is capable of doing this, and we're going to be there every single time. And they kept trying and they kept trying, and they were right. I got it. Just like your family, they were there when it got tough. They were there.
My parents and my brother and sister were there.
Yes, that's what I mean. Your blood, and that is it right there. I mean, that is so important that you have that alcoholics and addicts feel loved regardless of what they.
And by the way, even friends. I mean, I had girlfriends of mine who never gave up and, got on airplanes when it
got
when,
ugly.
it was really something. We know statistically, and what you're saying is so important because we know statistically a third of all Americans believe that addiction is a moral failing,
Right.
that you're a bad person, or there's something wrong, with you. I really want to talk about, because you gave an amazing TED talk about this, about trauma in childhood and how it can affect, and we're talking about all different kinds of trauma. I mean, your own trauma was sexual abuse at a very young age that you kept secret. My own trauma was abandonment. My father going to Vietnam and feeling, utterly abandoned and having, terrible separation disorder, anxiety, and daily panic attacks.
Oh my God.
But the point is you and I both went through, for very different traumas, childhoods where we felt deeply unsafe and pervasively afraid. I mean, I don't think there was a day that I didn't feel absolute abject fear.
Exactly.
As did you, because you felt so unsafe. So in all of your work in recovery, you're also a recovery coach. You help people get sober and stay sober. Tell me what you've learned about childhood trauma and how that affects your brain, and why so many people who suffer with substance use disorder have experienced childhood trauma of some kind.
I think that's the thing. What I'd learned is that it lives in the body. Trauma lives in our body and our cells, and our nervous system has recorded it. We can't just intellectualize our way out of. We have to, almost like an inverse PTSD, we have to have an experience that is tinged with positivity, with that recontextualized experience. It's almost, EMDR. I think you've done EMDR. There's many different things you can do for trauma, but I think acknowledging that it is in our body. I think that's why somatic healing is getting, some attention, is that your nervous system has recorded that. And so, it's almost like there's more information. There really is more information going to the brain from the body than the other way around. There, you're taking information and then you send it to the brain, and then you have thoughts about it. But it's trauma is a driving, and different things work for different people. I've worked with some people that trauma it's almost insurmountable to them, and different things, work for them. Like, some people don't want to relive the experience, and but I really feel like if you have undigested trauma, it's going to manifest physically somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You've said that the neurological impact. I mean, it's not just your nervous system, it's your brain. It rewires how you think and how you feel.
Right.
And that the impact of childhood trauma often leads to addictive behavior because the child is in a perpetual state of survival. And that's what resonated for me, because it did feel like every day was I just need to just survive. And to be in that fight or flight state that, we've heard scientists and doctors and neurologists talk about, that heightened state of fight or flight is exhausting. And I don't know about you, but for me, a drink was the first thing that gave me relief from that perpetual state of readiness. I'm on alert, constantly looking for what might hurt me or endanger me, because the world has felt so unsafe for so long.
Exactly. And biologically, we're not meant or capable of living in that survival state for very long. Illness will present itself, whether it's addiction, cancer, autoimmune disease, it will present somewhere. If you maintain that survival mode, our bodies aren't meant to stay in that. That's just for if there's a tiger, coming at us, not perpetual is a killer.
I was struck if for people who are still not sure they understand what that's like and the relief that alcohol finally gives, you said once that when you first tried alcohol, quote, it was like an elephant lifting off my chest, and for the first time I could breathe. That's what all that trauma and traumatic stress had been like for you, your entire childhood and adolescence. And when you finally tried that first drink, that was the relief it gave you and why it got its hooks in you.
Off the bat, it had its hooks in me. I mean, high school, hidden trash bag, hidden of those little small I had a fake ID, and I would get those small vodka bottles. And I remember my mom finding it. And like, what are these? And I just, it was from a party we had. But I mean, I was hiding. I was in the closet drinker in high school, drinking before going to school, drinking before a dance, performance, or I was captain of the varsity team. I was doing all these things, like wanting to be kind of like you, like showing up and wanting to be seen and perform and everything. But at the same time, I had so much, I didn't want any eyes on me. I was crippled with panic and, inside, and I had to drink to be able to do all that. And it's just crazy.
Talk a little bit about the disparity, the fact that the outside's not matching the insides, because one of the reasons why so many people didn't think for the longest time that you had a problem with alcohol long after your drinking had become deeply problematic was because you looked good from the outside.
Right.
I had the same thing. I had a job and you're not passing out. In other words, people can be deeply in trouble with self-medicating their own feelings and still, like you,
functioning. You're
gorgeous. You've got this burgeoning career in the public eye. You're a model. You're an actress. You're a comedian. Everything looks good, from the outside looking in. She's gorgeous. She can't have any problems, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Oh my gosh, isn't that crazy that we can put on this mask that really successfully fools people? I mean, I really fooled people. The people close to me, like the guy I was with, he knew I had a problem, but he kind of made a light of it. And I hid a lot of it too. But the fact that I was able to keep this facade going, and eventually, obviously, I couldn't keep it going. I mean, I crashed and burned hard. I burned bridges. I was scared to ever go back to the entertainment industry because I associated that with panic and drinking. And but I really did fool people, and there is that disparity of what you're, and so that's why I think, we see Instagram, we see people most people struggle. We're all human. I don't think the compulsive comfort seeking with addiction is unique. I think everybody has a thing, and we all struggle and have that human condition. And just knowing that makes me feel better. That's why I loved reading your book. It's like, we're all human, and we have the existential angst, and so just knowing I'm not alone in that is so freeing. It's liberating.
Yeah. Yeah. The connection you get from sharing. I mean, that's the power of, for me, meetings, hearing other people's stories and knowing, oh my God, I'm not the only one.
I think that's why it was first in the first years of recovery, throughout going to meetings, the speakers would be hysterical, turning all of this darkness into hilarity and light, and shining a light on it, and finding the humor in these really devastating, tragic things. And I found that to be so profound and healing, and the whole room laughing together and instantly bonding over this humor, this connection of laughter. And so that I really caught on to. I latched onto that because I thought, oh my God, this was the belly laugh I had when I was 14 or 11, whenever. And I remembered it. I wanted more of it. And I thought, there's something about this that's really healing to the soul. And so, and comedy always has been for me, even though I kind of used it to deflect a lot of the pain. Initially, it was always very healing to me to laugh, to find the humor in things, and important to me. And it's always been something that my family has done is humor is very important to us. But yeah, so I wanted to talk about that and talk about the neuroscience of laughter and how healing it is actually to our neurobiology, what it does, what surges when we laugh, and how it facilitates connection immediately. And it's a survival thing, actually, laughter, is we come into the world. I remember watching Callum when he was like 3 months old, cracking up in his sleep. And I thought, okay, this is like reincarnation, or this is just a survival thing. We know to laugh about things as a newborn because it's instinctive. That's how we can release our nervous system and live in the world and find, levity and light. And I just think it's so fascinating.
Callum is your son?
Callum is my son. Yeah. He's almost 3.
Wow. Amazing. over the pandemic, you started the Sober Mom Squad because, as you said a few minutes ago, the number of women drinking more and drinking dangerously over the last decade has escalated, but especially during the pandemic.
Yes.
How does the Sober Mom Squad work? And how did you guys get together and form it?
First of all, it's community. It is unbelievable how impactful just having a community of women that are going through similar situations can be to women that feel isolated, alone. Motherhood can be very lonely. You lose yourself in your children and your doing and your caretaking and what you were doing, the breadwinner, everything is crazy. But and these women come together and they're like, oh my God, I'm not the only one. I'm not alone. And we have meetings, and we brought it together because we knew that women were suffering. Women were suffering during the pandemic. Kids were home. They had nowhere to turn. They were, everything was on the shoulders of mothers. And so just starting this community and having meetings, having access to we call it a big sis, but it's like a mentor or a sober sponsor. Mm-hmm. And, there's all these different webinars of experts that come on. And I think it's just having the community. There's single moms, there's just all these different meetings for women of the same, that come from the same,
And everybody there is trying to stop drinking or cut back on drinking or just re-examine her relationship with drinking.
Right. So really it's just exploring a life without alcohol. There's no like, oh, you can't be, here. And there's people that are still struggling that mm-hmm. Just are interested in how do I do this? And then they're coming. But it's very inclusive. It's a lot of these women they've gone to AA and they don't mm-hmm. identify because they haven't quite, they don't feel like they relate. So they needed somewhere to go. There's a whole gray area of drinking now.
Well, there's a whole bunch of communities that have, popped up in the last few years. I mean, this is this sober curious movement, which is what some people call it, because it's not, it's not like you must stop drinking or else, or you can't be here. Although even AA doesn't have that rule. You can go to AA every day and say, I want to stop drinking, but I haven't.
Exactly.
It's important to point that out. That AA, I think a lot of people have, an impression that it's a very black and white dogmatic thing, but it's not. Anybody's welcome who wants to, examine it. But it's been interesting. And I think it's a good thing because it isn't one size fits all. Some people, different communities work for different people. But I think anytime you're having people examine their relationship with alcohol, something I think I wished I'd done in my 20s or 30s or even 40s. I got sober in my 50s. But, long before I got into my own little death spiral, if I'd been in some group where people, well, why do you drink? Why do you have to have had a glass of wine before you walk into that cocktail party? Why do you have to go home and have a drink after you've had a really tough day of work? Why?
And I think the main message is for people in that gray area, is it serving you?
Yeah.
Is it serving you? Is it helping your life, or do you think it's harming you? Is it harming the families? You really take a microscope and look at it and objectively and see that it's not serving you. So a lot of people are kind of realizing this way before they get in the grips. And so there needs to be a place for these women. And
it's great. It's really great. So what's happening with you career-wise now?
Oh my gosh. I have been entrenched in motherhood. I mean, the first 2 years, you're like trying to remember your name and what you like, what color what's my style? Like you forget everything in motherhood. I had written a memoir, and then kind of probably around the same, maybe a little after you, and it something made me kind of pause with it when I was done. And then I met Matthew, I got pregnant, everything changed. My perception of a lot of things that I had gone through changed through the lens of motherhood.
Sure.
So I had pressed pause on it and wanted to, kind of just revisit it and see it through a different lens and rewrite, obviously, everything that happened after that. So that's still on pause and in the works. But other than that, I have just been doing podcasts, momming, and that's it, writing, blogging. It's, sharing my story, helping others. I work in recovery. So I do recovery coaching and facilitation and one-on-ones. And, it's very fulfilling. It's very fulfilling. I think I'm just sort of finding myself again. To be honest, I have been so lost in motherhood that I am just finding myself again in what I want, to do for me in these next. But it's been the most meaningful thing this is the most meaningful job I've ever had in my life, being a mom.
You must sometimes look at Callum and think, it's a miracle. It's a miracle he's here. It's a miracle I'm here.
Mm-hmm. What's crazy is I was working with this girl who unfortunately, sadly passed later on, that was struggling. And I went with her. She was Jewish and they had a house in Jerusalem across a view of the Wailing Wall. And I went with her there. She wanted to, go for spiritual reasons. And I went to the Wailing Wall and I just leaned my head up against it. And I felt every prayer uttered there, every cry, every scream, these notes tucked into the wall. I mean, I was just sobbing, and I just prayed. I prayed for a son, that could hear the call of God. And just, I was just sitting there crying and unleashing everything that I've ever, been through, and absorbing everything from the Wailing Wall. And then 3 months later, I was pregnant with Callum.
Wow.
And I just felt like, oh, this is where, I'm guided by the Spirit to go. And just, it was just a beautiful experience, and just ineffable, inexplicable, the feelings you have.
Well, Jessica Landon, it was really an honor to have you on. Your story, I think, is going to help a lot of people, and you continue to pay it forward in so many ways. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was just such a lovely time chatting with you. It was a mom date.
Thank you so much for listening to Heart of the Matter. As a reminder, if you need help with a loved one struggling with substance use, you can text JOIN to 55753 or visit drugfree.org. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website at drugfree.org/podcast. And if you enjoy what you hear, please consider leaving us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. We'll talk to you soon.